Hello, my name is Ken Westerman. I am a grad student at the University of Missouri in St. Louis, United States. And this is my presentation on the legacy of your brain on drugs from the 1997 and 2016 ad series. So in 1987, this ad appears on American television.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Okay, so this was a PSA. A PSA is a public service announcement. It's not an ad. It's designed to raise awareness and encourage positive behaviors from people, specifically designated for nonprofit groups. Now, Time magazine named this one of the top PSAs of all times. TV Guide called it one of the 100 greatest commercials of all times. Entertainment Weekly rated it the number 8 best commercial of all times, and CNN called it one of the most influential ad campaigns in the history of marketing. So the question this paper is addressing is why? What made this ad iconic? And the answer is there was a confluence of events that happened that brought this PSA to prominence. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So when we start, we got to go back to 1971. Richard Nixon proclaimed a war on drugs in 1971. And this actually started with a report he got that Vietnam veterans returning from the Vietnam War were coming back with heroin addiction. And that was the original drug problem that this was supposed to address. However, it was also true that drugs were being used by disenfranchised youth. And Nixon, this may sound facetious, but it's actually kind of true. Nixon used it as a tool to attack his dissenters. When somebody spoke out, he could say, that's just a hippie who's high on pot. And the more people were dissenting against Nixon, the more evidence he used it as a rampant drug problem. So it was a way to quiet his dissenters. Now, that may sound facetious, but there is actually evidence to suggest that's what the war on drugs was about. It was a tool for Richard Nixon to attack his dissenters. So over 3 years, Nixon allocated $450,000 for a PSA program that would address the drug problem in America. He contracted with the Ad Council. The Ad Council was a propaganda arm of the United States government that had existed since World War II. They gave us iconic messages like Rosie the Riveter, Smokey the Bear, United Negro College Fund, and the Crying Indian. And if you're an American over the age of 50, you know all of those ads. Those were all famous Ad Council ads. And they did studies, and the studies suggested that alcohol abuse was a gateway to drugs. However, public service announcements are the prerogative of the television stations to run. They don't have to run them. They get the choice. And the TV networks told them that they would not allow the Ad Council to make an ad that attacked alcohol. Alcohol was their biggest sponsor. And in fact, cigarette ads had been banned in 1971. So they were already feeling the loss of revenue from not being able to put cigarette ads on television. They said any ad that attacked alcohol, they would not run. So the Ad Council had to direct their ads specifically at drugs and not mention alcohol, which was a little bit missing the point. If you were trying to solve a drug problem, you had to start off by addressing an alcohol problem, but they weren't going to do that. So Nixon's PSAs were widely seen as ineffective. They did, however, introduce the idea in American culture of a war on drugs. In 1980, Ronald Reagan becomes president. Nancy Reagan decides her cause. It's long been the prerogative of the First Lady of the United States to have a cause that she would champion. This has gone on since Eleanor Roosevelt, probably before then, but really Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who brought it to prominence. That the First Lady has a cause that she champions. Nancy Reagan decided hers was going to be to stop drug abuse. And she started this widely publicized Just Say No campaign. And in truth, it was Nancy Reagan going to schools, talking to kids and saying, kids, just say no to drugs. And it was a bit grandmotherly, this elderly woman coming in and telling you, don't do drugs, sweetie. It didn't work. And it wasn't that her intentions were bad. It was just she wasn't the person to connect with the audience to get that message across. She did ask her celebrity friends to go on camera and say, hey, kids, just say no to drugs. And that had some effect. So Nancy tried to work with the Ad Council to get a series of PSAs out to address this problem of drug addiction. The Ad Council, they had a problem that they answered to both politicians and corporations, and many of the advertising agencies didn't want to work with the Ad Council because it was mired in bureaucracy and it made it very difficult to get a message out. So in 1985, the Partnership for Drug-Free America is formed. Now, this is formed primarily because they saw a need in Nancy Reagan's efforts, and they recognized that the Ad Council was not going to be able to get her messages on the air. So they formed with a $300,000 grant from the American Association of Advertisers, and they initially started off with a 3-year mission of getting PSAs on the air addressing this drug problem. And they had a stated goal of achieving $1 million a day in advertising revenue. That didn't mean they were going to pay $1 million a day. That meant they were going to get $1 million a day of ad revenue. And they were going to get it by bartering, freebies, or buying at a discount. The couple of things to point out about the Partnership for Drug-Free America, these were marketing people. These were not people passionate about stopping drugs. These were people passionate about making a message. And initially, they were a clearinghouse for PSAs. They would have other advertising firms provide the message to them, and they would find a place to put them. They were sort of a clearinghouse. The message would come to them. They would find a place to put it. And they also had to define drugs as illegal because they were taking financial support from pharmaceutical companies. And it wasn't until 1988 that became it was revealed in 1988 that they were taking pharmaceutical money from pharmaceutical companies. And then in 1997, they had to stop taking money from pharmaceutical companies. But for their financial well-being, they had to be sure to define drugs as illegal. Initially, they collected PSAs, public service announcements, from other advertising firms who wanted to clean up their reputation. Other firms had kind of mired in the idea that they were advertising sodas, fast food, pharmaceuticals. They wanted a clean ad they could point to and say, hey, we do good work too. And that was the idea. Initially, they were rejecting about 4 out of 5 messages they were getting from advertising companies, and they were able to assess what wasn't working in the ads. In 1986, Ronald Reagan signs a $1.7 billion act to combat drugs, the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And in that, he allocated $200 million over 5 years dedicated to creating PSAs on television to stop drug abuse. And he named specifically the PDFA as the production arm that would oversee production. Now, this was a new role for the PDFA. Prior to this, they were simply a clearinghouse where other people sent their messages and the PDFA got it on television. When Reagan signs this bill, he suddenly promotes them to being the producers. They are now in charge of making the message. It changes their mission just a little bit. 1986, Congress gets $200 million. It's $200 million over 5 years, so $40 million a year. So they went from a $300,000 budget to a $40 million budget. And then in 1987, we get the Brain on Drugs PSA, the one I showed at the beginning. Now, the Brain on Drugs PSA, the first problem the PDFA wanted to address is they wanted their ads on primetime television. Now, PSAs by nature run of schedule. They run when the television station decides they're going to run. They don't run in primetime. They don't typically run in primetime. They typically run wherever there's a hole in the broadcast day. But the PDFA wanted their ads in primetime. And this is a sample of what would have been the shows at that time that they would have wanted their ads in. I don't know the exact rotation. Excuse me. I don't know the exact rotation of shows at that time, but this is a representational sample of where they were targeting their ads. Now I have to look at the television regulatory environment at the time. The FCC, the Federal Communication Commercial, mandated since the 1950s that every television station broadcasting in America has to broadcast 90 minutes of locally originated content every week. The PSAs that people were giving them count towards their acting in the public interest. The TV stations are not allowed to charge to run a PSA, but they are programmed run of schedule. So they don't have to give them a prime slot. They can just, wherever there's a hole in the broadcast day, they put a PSA on. In the 1970s, local TV newscasts began to pop up around the country, and about half the stations had a local newscast. And this meant that there was no longer a pressing need to get 90 minutes of PSAs on your television station anymore because you were easily surpassing your 90-minute goal with your local TV newscast. So PSAs were disappearing from the American landscape in the 1970s. 1980s, a new situation developed when cable television came along. The Federal Communications Commission said, if you're going to run a cable stations, if you're going to run cable, you have to carry the local affiliate on your television station. And that was fine, except for TV stations at the time did not run 24/7. They ran till about midnight, turned their signals off. They put up, this concludes our broadcast day. Here's color bars. And they ran color bars for 6 hours. However, the cable affiliate was running syndicated programs 24/7. So their audiences started tuning away. The TV stations needed something to keep their broadcast stream up for 6 hours. Now, this is where infomercials come from. Infomercials are 30-minute program length commercials. They typically look like a talk show and they have one product and everybody raves about how great that product is for 30 minutes. This was a boom industry in the 1980s because TV stations needed to fill that midnight hours, and this was advertisers paying for 30 minutes to put their product on it. So that's where infomercials came from. The other thing that the TV stations started doing was they began cramming all of their PSAs into the overnight programming. And this was a disappointment to the people who were producing PSAs because they knew nobody was watching in the middle of the night. So there was a request put before the Federal Communication Commission to mandate that there be 90 seconds of PSA time every 2 hours of the broadcast day. So every 2 hours, every station was going to have to put 90 seconds of PSAs on television. Now, ultimately, the FCC declined. Instead, they changed the rules to say that PSAs have to air between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. to be counted towards a station's 90-minute goal. They can run them other hours of the day, but they don't count. However, that rule was still in development when the PDFA showed up looking for their time slot. And for the PDFA and the network, TV networks, this was viewed as a win-win. I'm sorry, the PDFA approached the television networks to say we want we want to buy time on broadcast television in prime time. And this was viewed as a win-win because the PDFA got their primetime slots where they wanted them. They got to put their ad in the programs that they wanted. They got it at a discount that they could afford. And the networks got paid to run 90 seconds of content every 2 hours, which was time they were going to have to potentially give away. And as an added bonus, since it was running on the network, every affiliate got their 90 seconds of PSA time every 2 hours. So this was viewed as a win-win. The fact that the PDFA was willing to buy PSA time in prime time. This was a huge win for everybody. The Partnership for Drug-Free America, they had no ad available. They were now charged with making ads. They had no ad available. Everything they had wasn't working. And they were able to analyze what would work. They did learn that statistics were ineffective on teenagers. They just, whenever you put a statistic on the television show, and do a commercial. Teenagers just blot out. Um, they learned authenticity was key. Stereotypes didn't work. Peer recognition was important to teens. That's the threat to their social status was more persuasive than physical threats of physical harm to them. Fear wasn't necessarily motivating. And they also discovered that parents of this generation had a hard time being authoritative in this realm. They had been the generation that grew up with drugs. So for them to approach their children and say, don't do drugs, was really not, that message was not resonating with the kids. So they needed a new ad that had all these ideas wrapped into it. They found agencies were wanting too much time or too much money to develop the ad appropriately, and they wound up contracting with the Los Angeles advertising agency of Kai, Donna, and Pearlstein. Kai, Donna, and Pearlstein had made their name in the 1960s when they made political ads for Richard Nixon. They had a contract with the Peace Corps in the 1970s, and they made California tourism ads and promoted Lone Star beer in Southern California in the 1980s. They had no office, and they met in a hotel room. They in the 1980s they had about 15 employees and they had about a $1.5 million annual budget. So this was not an insignificant company, but it wasn't one of the huge players. It was a modest little business that could. And then the PDFA showed up did not have a respectable budget to do what they had to do. They had a looming deadline. They had to get it on the air when the time that they had purchased, they had already pre-purchased their time. So they had to get it on within the deadline before they lost their time that they had bought from the network. And they did not have a respectable budget. And Paul Kai came up with the concept that it needed to be an allegorical fear message, something that they could equate to something else. The spot was going to be low budget. The director, camera operator, Joe Pitka, volunteered to do the ad. Lead actor, John Rosolius, he was paid $360 to appear in the ad. That was it. One check for 1 day's work, no royalties. I can't swear to this, but I think the ad was shot in 16 millimeter film. I say that simply because all of the ads I find on YouTube look very 16 millimeter. They don't look like 35 millimeter film. I could be wrong. I don't know that for a fact. And then Kai, Donna, and Pearlstein, this was a funny story. Kai, Donna, and Pearlstein had no VCR. So when they got the ad done, they took the Partnership for Drug-Free America down to an electronics store, handed the electronics store a VHS tape, said, can you put this on for us so we can see it? And it was there that the PDFA saw the ad and said, okay, we like it. We'll take this. But I think it's funny that they didn't have a VCR. The mechanics of the PSA. It is one shot from a camera POV. It is a low camera angle that infers that John Rosolius is speaking to a child. John Rosolius is modeling a behavioral technique for parents to address their children. It is unapologetic and it is direct. Just matter of fact, here it is. This is what you're going to do. That is intentionally a modeling behavior for parents who are having trouble getting this message out. The John Rosolius is an average Joe. It's a very unassuming home. Anybody watching this ad in America can place themselves in that situation. It's not a far stretch to say that could be me he's talking to. The spot opens with a closed-ended question and it ends with a closed-ended question. A closed-ended question is one that the viewer understands the connotation of the message from the question itself. And that is a marketing tool. It makes people feel empowered when they can figure out their own answer. This one does it twice. It opens and it closes. Is there anybody out there? That's start one. And closing the question at the end is any questions? Boom. Those are marketing tools. It also has the words last time in it to infer that it's a message of urgency. And then there's no cut to the frying pan drop to maintain authenticity. I could suggest to you that there would have been a discussion in the editing room whether or not they want to use that The frying pan drop is a gavel punctuation point. Just bam, here's my point, bam. But they didn't. They stayed with the single shot because they knew if they put a cut in that, it was going to take away from the power of that low camera POV. They made the right choice, but I can see where they would have had a discussion. Do we cut to this frying pan or we let it go? They did not. And the other issue, the PDFA had no other ad available. So they had all this advertising time purchased and no other ad ready to go. This one got ran in heavy rotation. Communication theories, you could say this is the extended parallel process, except for extended parallel process didn't exist at the time, or at least it hadn't been codified as a technique at the time. So this is a better example of the elaborate likelihood model. Elaborate likelihood model comes in two routes. It comes in where the one audience will watch it beginning to end. They'll absorb into the message and take it. The other message is an audience that's walking through the room and they'll get the message. In this case, the central route would be a teenager watching a father figure talking to them, giving that father figure their attention as if dad is speaking, he's saying something important, I should listen to him. And then they're going to be persuaded that I should do what dad wants me to do. That's the central route. The peripheral route is the teenager walking through the room who's thinking, that's stupid. I've done drugs. My brain isn't a fried egg. That's a dumb ad, but I get it. Drugs are dangerous. Approach with caution. They still get the message. So this is an elaborate likelihood model. A practicing executive function, it takes about 25 years for the brain to fully form. One of the last things we do is learn how to use executive function, which is the ability to plan things like life decisions, like should I buy a car? Should I go to college? Should I wear a condom? These are all questions that we ask. We practice kind of going through, and these have life repercussions, and we don't have to do that typically until about the age of 12, because up until about 12, decisions are made for you. Between 12 and 20 is the time in your life when you get to practice doing this stuff. And then after 20, you're kind of on your own. So Frying Pan actually invited young adults to practice using executive function, and it gave teens a space to comprehend the question before confronting it in real life. So it asked the question and it let the kids kind of stew over it. And then when they were confronted with it, they had an answer. Now, studies suggested the PDFA had moved the needle from 78% comprehension of the dangers of drugs to a 92% comprehension of drugs. And between 1985 and 1991, the number of high school seniors reporting cocaine use dropped from 13.1 to 3.5%. Okay. You got to approach this with a grain of salt. The PDFA sponsored many of these studies. So that right there tells you you're a little skewed. Another thing was that Reagan in his Drug Abuse Act allocated $230 million in grants for public schools to do drug training at the same time. So this was happening simultaneously to the ad series. And we also doubled the amount of money we were putting into enforcement. So there was a lot going on in the same time frame. So we can't really say the ad did this. We can say there was this change over the time, but we can't really pinpoint it to the ad itself. So back to my original question. Why? What made this ad so effective? The national sentiment towards drugs was changing. Teens had spent their whole lives hearing messages. Teens of this generation spent their whole life hearing messages about drug abuse. And Nancy Reagan had created a space for this message to resonate. This was a non-corporate message, so it didn't have a lot of the trappings that a corporate message has, and it had a slightly different feel. The TV regulatory environment at the time was changing, so there was a space for this ad to appear where it needed to be. The ads were placed in the right programming spots. It was in a high ad rotation because it was the only ad the PDFA had available. It allowed teenagers to exercise executive function, allowed them to practice and learn how to make a decision. It utilized social engineering in the ad campaign. And it created a schema that resonates today. There's my famous, this is your brain on drugs, this is your brain with a side of bacon. Every time somebody of my generation sees an egg in a frying pan, one of our first conclusions is, there's my brain on drugs. Now, over the next 10 years, the PDFA released dozens of ads known for stressing emotions over facts. They earned about $1 million a year in donations, and they nearly achieved their $1 million per day ad goal. By the mid-1990s, the PDFA had achieved a brand recognition that rivaled McDonald's. It is estimated that every American ran into at least one PDFA ad every day for about 10 years. So in 1997, we come up with another PDFA ad, and this is the Brain on Heroin PSA. And it looks like this.
This is your brain. And this is heroin. This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin. And this is what your body goes through. Wait, it's not over yet. This is what your family goes through. And your friends and your money. And your job. And your self-respect. And your future. And your life. Any questions?
So it's 10 years later. This ad is a more contemporary ad. It's still very Joe average household. It's not anything exceptional. The camera is now eye level. We're now eye level with actress Rachel Lee Cook, and she is presented as a peer. So we're no longer talking adult to child. We're talking peer to peer. This is a teenager talking to a teenager, 20-year-old talking to a 20-year-old. She's sexy and cool. Men want to date her. Women want to befriend her. She's got that good balance where she is approachable by both men and women. This ad is not one shot. It's making judicious use of edits. And this ad is more visceral. There is no peripheral view on this ad. You take it in. It is in your face. You have to watch it. Now, when it comes to theory, when I first wrote this paper back 3 years ago, I said this is an example of the theory of planned behavior. Nobody questioned me, and I went on with my life. When I got to writing the paper for Paris, when I got to put my PowerPoint together for Paris, I thought, no, this is the extended parallel process. And I thought, well, why did I think it was theory of planned behavior? So let me explain. Theory of planned behavior is simply this. You're going to do what your friends do. If your friends are all buying Samsung phones, you are going to be tempted to buy a Samsung phone. If your friends are all driving Chevys, you're going to be tempted to buy a Chevy. And in this illustration, if you can think that you are in a parasocial relationship with Rachel Lee Cook, you want to be her friend, you want to be in her inner circle, then you can say this is theory of planned behavior. If you are moved to be with her in a parasocial relationship, then this is theory of planned behavior. However, it's arguable if theory of planned behavior applies to parasocial. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. It's kind of a tweaky thing. So with that in mind, I call this the extended parallel process. The extended parallel process is simply this. You're going to give people a terrible message about how bad this thing is going to be, this experience is going to be, and a coping and an efficacy. This is what you can do about it. In this case, she's saying, this is how bad it's going to get, but you have the choice to not do it. That's what she's telling you. And the person gets to make the decision, am I going to do this or not? That's the extended parallel process. Okay. Effectiveness, drug use. The trend in the 1980s was there was a downward trend in drug abuse. And if anything, you could say Nancy Reagan was being effective because drugs were going down. The fried egg in a frying pan actually comes out near the bottom. So it's kind of catching the end of the wave. We were already moving in that direction. And the egg in the frying pan was just kind of the cherry on top of the whole movement. Our drug use problem begins to spike back up About the time Bill Clinton becomes president, and in 97, we get the brain on heroin and things kind of plateau. However, it is also important to note that we are now doubling the amount of money we are spending on this problem. These three lines, the bottom line is how much is being spent internationally. The orangish line in the middle is treatment and prevention, and the dark line is law enforcement. So we are doubling almost every year the amount of money we are spending on this problem. So in 1998, Congress puts $1.3 billion into the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And this kind of becomes a debacle. This is a regulatory body. They embed storylines in TV shows. I believe they paid the show ER $1.7 million to do a whole narrative about one of their doctors becoming a drug user. They paid ESPN to do in-depth stories about athletes who had lost their social standing because they became drug abusers. So it was a little insidious because they would follow these people around to the depths of their despair and put it on television. But they were paid to do that. The Office of National Drug Control Policy was paying them to show how bad people's lives got. They created local news interstitials for the TV stations to put on in the newscast and pretend like it was news. And in 2002, they did the stupidest Super Bowl ad ever. They did this. Everything in 2002 was about supporting terrorism. They don't support terrorism. And they conflated doing drugs with supporting terrorism. And you couldn't quite make that leap in any logical way. So it was a really twisted, weird ad. And they spent $3 million on it. And then finally, in 2005, Thomas Early and Shauna Seifert from Ogilvy and Mather were sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzling $3 million from the ONDCP for the drug control policies, for the drug control ads. So in 2007, Congress held hearings to say, what did we waste our money on? Why was this not effective? And one of the things they came up with, this chart is from 2000, but the number one cause of death in America in 2000 was tobacco. It wasn't drug abuse. In fact, tobacco is number one, poor diet and exercise was number two, alcohol is number three, motor vehicles is like number 10, homicides number 11, and illegal drugs is like number 12 on the list. It's way down there. So Congress was asking, what are we wasting our money on? We're not addressing a problem. And this is, in fact, where the truth ads come from. If you're from America, you'll recognize the truth ads. They were these smoking ad campaigns with these really graphic smoking ads. That's where those ads came from, was because they found out tobacco was the number one cause of death in America. And that's why they did the truth ads. But so they wind up, so Congress kind of takes the funding away from ONDCP and says, we got to get back on track with this messaging. They have a come to Jesus moment where they have to figure out, what are we trying to say to people to get this straight? And in 2016, we come up with the Any Questions PSA. It looks like this.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Yeah, I have questions.
Prescription drugs aren't as bad as street drugs, right?
Weed's legal, isn't it?
Drinking is worse than smoking weed.
Isn't it? Why
Is heroin so addictive?
Molly just makes you feel happy.
I have questions.
Mom?
Dad, did you ever try drugs?
They're going to ask. Be ready. Go to drugfree.org. A message from Partnership for Drug-Free Kids.
Now, Partnership for Drug-Free Kids was the new name of Partnership for Drug-Free America. It's a nostalgia campaign. It addresses an audience that grew up with the ad. The kids are now asking the questions. It's narrated by Allison Janney, who has had her brother died of drug abuse, so she was kind of a good spokesperson for that. It's an EPPM, high threat, high efficacy. The threat being the kids are going to ask questions, and the efficacy is this is where you go to find answers. And it's a more contemporary ad with a call to action. All the ads since the arrival of the internet now have this, for more information, go here. This one does that as well. That was not a trend before the internet came along. That gets me to my closing slide, my citations. There's a whole bunch of them. This is me. And two things you need to know about me. One, my wife and I just bought a house in Portugal. We'll be moving to Europe soon. And the number two thing is I am wrapping up my master's degree with UMSL, but I need to do a practicum or a research project or something to put a bow on all that. And I'll be living in Europe soon. So if there's somebody here who needs help, I am available. Thank you very much for your time.